today I have the great pleasure of speaking with Professor Lorraine Brennan. And Lorraine is full professor of human nutrition in University College Dublin. And today we will chat about precision nutrition, food for thought. Hi, Lorraine.
Hi, Patricia. I'm very good, thanks. How are you?
I'm doing great, Lorraine. So my first question for you, as always, is where are you located and what's been keeping you going over the last few months?
Well, I'm based in Dublin, so I work in UCD and I live in Dublin. And I guess over the last few months, keeping me going, particularly during lockdown, was the fact that I live near the sea. So being able to get out to the sea and walk by the sea has been fabulous. And then more recently, when we're able to actually leave Dublin, I took the first opportunity I could to get out of Dublin and back to rural Ireland, where I'm originally from.
Superb, Lorraine. That sounds lovely. So Lorraine, you are full professor of human nutrition at UCD. Can you please tell our audience about your role and what makes you so passionate about what you do?
Well, here in UCD, I teach on the BSc in Human Nutrition and the MSc in Food Nutrition and Health. And I also lead a research group looking at interaction between nutrition, metabolism and health. And I guess one of the key things that makes me very passionate about this is the opportunity to work with young people, to teach young people, and to also train the future generation of nutrition scientists. I think we're a very lucky opportunity, and we're very fortunate in working in universities to be surrounded by such a fabulous group of young people.
And I'm sure mentorship is so important actually to your role. So actually moving on to your title, Lorraine, Precision Nutrition, Food for Thought. Can you please tell our audience more about this?
Yeah, well, I guess the whole concept for precision nutrition has emerged over the last few years, and it's emerged both from work that my group done here in UCD and others have done in UCD, but also outside of UCD. And essentially what we started to notice, and others too, was that individuals respond very specifically to a food, but that the individual response to a particular food would be very different for the next individual. So for example, Patricia, you might respond to a breakfast in a very different way that I respond to exactly the same breakfast, but actually your response will be very consistent. And if we done the test on you tomorrow, it would be exactly the same. So what we call is, we say that the within individual response to food is very consistent, but actually the between individuals is highly variable. And we call this a high inter-individual variability. And we're trying to tweak this and understand the basis for this, to try ultimately to deliver advice to individuals that is more appropriate to them at that particular time.
Wow, that is so interesting, and I'm sure our audience will have so many questions around that. So last question for you in our first 5 minutes is, in UCD Discovery, we are absolutely passionate about interdisciplinarity. And I'm just wondering, how important is this to your research?
It's actually fundamental to my research. So my research team is made up of a very different people who have come from very different backgrounds with very different skill sets. So we would have individuals more with a chemical background, individuals working with a food background. We would have dietitians and nutritionists. And we then collaborate with people across university. So I'm very fortunate to have strong collaborative links with colleagues in the School of Mathematics, with colleagues in engineering, and also colleagues in medicine. So interdisciplinarity is really, really key for us. And it's also a really fantastic opportunity to be working with individuals from different disciplines. You learn so much from it, and their take on things can be quite different to our perspective of things.
Wonderful, Lorraine, and already questions are flooding in, and please do remember, submit your questions, because I'm sure there'll be lots about this. So actually, an interesting question for you, Lorraine, that's popped up immediately is, what is your diet like?
Oh, my diet. My diet is, I guess it would be an Irish take on a Mediterranean diet. I am married to an Italian, so Mediterranean diet features quite heavily in our household, but also we have tailored it to the foods that we have available locally in Ireland. So we have lots of different types of fruit and vegetables. We use lots and lots of olive oil and eat quite a bit of oily fish.
Okay, great. So here is, what are the most common diet-related diseases that can be avoided?
Well, so the best way, I guess, of answering this would be to go back to looking at the global burden of diseases. And the most recent one from that came out in 2017. So they looked at all of the burden of diseases worldwide and what were the contributing factors. And they associated 11 million deaths in 2017 to poor diet. And poor diet meaning taking too much salt in, having low amounts of whole grain, so not enough whole grain, and having not enough fruit and veg. So those diets or diseases that they looked at in that were what we call non-communicable diseases. And these are, for example, type 2 diabetes, certain cancers such as colon cancer, and also third one now has gone out of my head, but cardiovascular disease actually was the third one, yeah. And indeed, so basically what they found was that diet was the key risk factor in these 11 million deaths in 2017.
Wow. And so just to go back to your own research, Lorraine, here's a question for you: the link between diet, metabolism, and health. And I suppose this is coming from, you were speaking about how, we can eat the same food, but metabolize it completely differently. And that's astounding to me as a scientist. Maybe you can explain it a little bit more to our audience.
Yeah, so I guess this is what we're trying to do and what we're trying to understand as well. So we're really at the cusp of understanding this. But just to bring it back to basics, so we eat our food, our digestion breaks down our food into our macromolecules, and our body then has to metabolize those macromolecules to generate energy. And so, for example, we want to break down our protein into our building blocks and our carbohydrates into our building blocks, and then we use those in the process of generating energy. But also there's lots of other metabolic pathways that are really important in the body. And what happens is that our metabolic pathways can be slightly different in different individuals, and that can be due to either a genetic predisposition of it. It can also be due to things like our gut microbiota. It can be due to our metabolic phenotype. And what we're trying to do, and others in the area, is really to harness that differences in metabolites and measure those differences in metabolites and use them, in our instance, to give more recommendations to individuals that are tailored to themselves. But others are looking at those small molecules to look to see if they're predictive of future risk of disease, for example. And there has been some interesting results that have found that harnessing the metabolism and the information you can get from metabolism can be very important and very predictive.
Okay, and you're doing a study, somebody's asking, you're doing a study around continuous glucose monitoring. Maybe you could, because that sounds very similar to what you were talking about there.
Yeah, so we have worked with these continuous glucose monitors that you put on your arm, and they monitor your glucose levels continuously over a day. So what we've done is we've fed individuals breakfast with different types of protein in that breakfast, and looking to see if we can see a difference at an individual level in how they respond to the breakfast and the type of protein. And again, what we're finding is that individuals themselves are very, very reproducible, but that they're very different from each other. And what we would fundamentally like to do is to understand a little bit more why they're different. We still don't fully understand it. We don't understand how to predict that differences, but the ultimate goal would be that we would be able to have a very simple blood sample or very simple measurements from individuals that would help us then to predict or to tailor their advice and what is suited their metabolism best.
Yeah, because there's a question in here actually, Lorraine, around that, around just get back up. Can a blood test be used to personalize and to tailor diets? Because it sounds like it can.
But probably not yet it would be
Okay.
maybe my answer to that. So there's lots of work ongoing, and I'm aware of a lot of research projects ongoing to show that. And there has been some recent papers out this year actually showing that using blood samples and using individuals' responses to certain challenges. So they give people acute challenges, like they give them a bolus of glucose and look to see how they respond to that, take blood from that, measure lots of different parameters in that response. And then they assigned them to different diets, and they found that they could help people to adhere to higher quality diets by doing this, and help them to shift their dietary intake by helping them with this personalized approaches. I personally think that we need a lot more research and a lot more science before this could be rolled out. We need to understand a lot more about why individuals are responding. We need to understand the different scenarios that could be happening, and the different scenarios where you would roll it out. But there's huge interest in it. It is definitely where the field is going, and even so that we're thinking ahead now to dietary recommendations and saying, well, how can we incorporate all of this new science that's emerging into the future development of dietary recommendations down the line?
And so there's lots of questions coming in for you, Lorraine, so I'll try to get through as many as possible in the last kind of couple of minutes. But does your research involve looking at genetics of the participants or their microbiomes?
So we don't do a lot of genetic work, but there are people in the field of nutrition who have looked at the genetics, and to date it hasn't yielded as much or as much success as what we would have liked. And not to say that in the future it won't, when we get more clever and probably at joining together genetic risk scores and understanding them a little bit better. But to date it hasn't. But there, in terms of the microbiome, yes, we are collaborate with our colleagues down in Cork to do some microbiome work, where we're interested in looking at people's microbiome and then how that is related to their response to food, but actually also their susceptibility for disease or health.
Yeah, because there's another question, Lorraine, very similar to that, but they're wondering if any genes have been identified specifically in relation to metabolism or carbohydrates, proteins, or fats that could be used for designing nutrigenomic diets for people. So they're basically referring to some advertising around this and how much of this is based on science. So there's a lot of questions in there, so we might just break it down, but basically any or carbohydrates, protein, and fats that can be used for designing nutrigenomic diets. Any yet?
Well, any that have really strong scientific evidence with randomized controlled trials data behind them, not yet. No. So one of the largest studies who tested that hypothesis came out last year, and they found no particular predictive ability of the genetic genes, the specific genes that they looked at from putting people on different diets. And so again, that's not to say that it might not happen in the future, but for the moment, the general advice is that the science isn't there to support it yet.
And so there's a lot of questions about advice and your opinion on veganism, vegetarianism, and So what is the advice, I suppose, in terms of what do we actually need? Because we hear so much in the media, and there's a lot of questions around vegetarianism, but how does that work? Can we actually survive on that alone?
Well, I guess the advice coming from nutritionists and dietitians working in the area and coming through from the HSE would be that you need a balanced diet. You need to have a certain amount of animal protein in there and dairy protein to maintain that balance. So for example, you need to have your vitamin B12. and you will get that in your diet from dairy products and from meat products. So if you're going to go down the route of vegetarianism and veganism, and that's people's choice, they have to be really careful, and they have to make sure that they're not becoming deficient in any of the key nutrients that we get from our diet, including the ones that I just mentioned. And for girls in particular, and teenagers in particular, it's a calcium would be the key one, and iron. So they're really important, and that in that early teenage years, and for girls' development and girls' growth. So we need to be really careful that if people are going down that route, that they get it. Now, we can make substantial changes without going completely vegetarian and or vegan. So a lot of people are choosing the option of a flexitarian, where you're reducing the amount of meat that you have in your diet, and you're supplementing and making sure that you get the protein from beans and pulses, nuts and legumes. But you're making a conscious decision to reduce the number of times that you have meat during the week, and that already will make significant progress from a sustainability point of view.
Okay, well, we're running completely out of time, but I have to ask these questions because there's a lot of them about so you've mentioned, and they picked up on, you mentioned gender differences, but also age. You know, I suppose we'll finish with this one. So the idea of the gender differences in diet and also age-related differences. You've touched on teenagers, but what of our aging population?
Yes, absolutely. So our requirements, and there's a lot of work going into that at the moment, here in UCD, looking at developing we'll say optimal products that are tailored towards older adults. So some of the key things in older adults that we need to look out for would be B vitamins, for example, to make sure that they have adequate quality of protein. So that quality of protein is really key, and that they also have adequate quality of dietary fat. So we're talking about omega-3s. So these are key things that are really important in older life as well, and trying to make sure that we have that balance in the diet is really key.
Lorraine, we are unfortunately completely out of time. Sincere apologies to those of you whose questions I did not get to, but I really want to take this opportunity to say an absolutely huge thanks to Lorraine for the most fascinating discussion today. Thank you so much, Lorraine.
Thank you, Patricia.
Yeah, and thanks so much to everyone from Brennan. You get us a claps, Lorraine. So don't forget, sign up for our series at soonforthought.ie. You can check out our list of upcoming speakers. Thank you all so much. Thanks again, Lorraine. Wonderful discussion. And we all, I think, know now we need to look at a balanced diet. So thanks so much, everyone. And we will see you all very soon on Zoom for Thought. Thank you. Take care. Bye, everyone.